He was a nameless bobcat, broken in body and spirit, waiting in a cold cage for a mercy he didn't understand. His fate was sealed, his story nearly over. But fate can change when compassion answers in time. One phone call, one act of kindness, opened a door between life and death. From sterile walls to the warmth of a home, from fear to belonging, this is Rambo's journey, the wild heart that refused to die and found love where no one thought it could live. The wind hissed across the Wyoming foothills, whispering through frost-burned grass and over the chain-link pens of Pine Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Inside one of the enclosures, a young bobcat lay motionless on a thin layer of straw. His ribs jutted through patchy fur, his eyes half closed, dull amber against the pale morning light. A tag on his gate read, Case 2847. To most, he was already gone, just waiting for the paper to catch up. Dr. Margaret Willis walked the corridor, her breath visible in the cold air. She'd worked this route for 15 years, but it never got easier. Her clipboard trembled slightly as she scanned the list. Euthanasia scheduled. Friday, 2 p.m. The words blurred. She swallowed hard and forced herself toward the last enclosure, the one that always made her hesitate. When she knelt, the bobcat lifted his head just enough to meet her gaze. There was no snarl, no wild defiance, only exhaustion. "You should hate me," she whispered. "You're supposed to hate all of us." But the animal simply blinked, the faint rise and fall of his chest, the only proof that life still lingered there. Outside, snow began to fall. It dusted the concrete like powdered glass, softening the edges of the world. Margaret leaned against the door frame, remembering the day he arrived, found collapsed by a hiker, starved, frightened, and clearly once someone's illegal pet. He hadn't hunted, hadn't fought, hadn't wanted to live. Rehabilitation had failed. The center's rules were clear. She had no choice. That afternoon, fluorescent light flickered above the exam table as she prepared sedatives. The metallic clatter of instruments filled the sterile silence. She paused, staring at her reflection in a cabinet window. Tired eyes, lines etched by too many last chances. Somewhere, deep inside, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, one more call could change things. Her phone buzzed before she could decide. The caller ID read, Wild Heart Sanctuary. Margaret hesitated, then answered. "Margaret Willis," she said, her tone brittle. "Is this about the bobcat?" The woman's voice on the other end was calm, almost gentle. "We heard you have one scheduled for euthanasia. We can take him if you'll let us." For a long moment, Margaret said nothing. Snow tapped against the window pane like a heartbeat. "He's not releasable," she finally said. "He's human imprinted, weak, barely eating. You'd be taking a ghost. Then we'll take the ghost," the woman replied. "Every life deserves its full measure of mercy." Margaret exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and disbelief breaking through her chest. "Send me your paperwork," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. As she hung up, she looked again toward the pen at the far end of the hall. The bobcat had shifted slightly, his ears twitching toward the sound of her footsteps. The next morning, she walked the corridor once more, But something had changed. She carried not a syringe, but a transfer crate lined with soft blankets. Rambo. She murmured the name she'd never dared to give him until now. He blinked, uncertain, as the gate creaked open. Margaret slipped the blanket around him, feeling the faint vibration of breath beneath her hands. Outside, the van idled, its back door open to the wind. A driver stepped forward with careful hands, checking the latch and the heat lamp inside. Margaret crouched beside the crate, meeting the Bobcat's eyes one last time. "You weren't meant to die today," she whispered. "Go prove me right." As the van pulled away, snow whipped through the parking lot, erasing its tire tracks. Margaret stood alone in the drifting white, watching until the red taillights disappeared into the fog. Behind her, the clipboard still hung on the office wall, next to the list that now had one name crossed out. In the quiet that followed, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Somewhere on the road ahead, a broken wild heart was being carried toward its uncertain future. And for the first time in months, Dr. Margaret Willis allowed herself to believe that maybe not every story at Pine Ridge had to end the same way. Night rolled along the highway, the rescue van a small glow moving through winter fields. In the crate, the young Bobcat breathed in thin, careful sips, eyes tracking the hum of passing lights. Jennifer drove steady, radio off, fingers loose on the wheel, listening for trouble, measuring every mile like a promise. At Pine Ridge, Margaret filed the transfer, then stopped at the empty pen. A square of straw remained, pressed flat by weeks of worry. She touched the tag that read, Case 2847, then turned it face down. The corridor felt wider, like someone had opened a window in winter, letting mercy in with the cold. Jennifer called ahead to Wyoming. Tom answered on the first ring, voice sandpapered by long nights. Linda listened beside him, knitting paused mid-stitch. They had prepped the quarantine pen, warmed the barn, and cleared the afternoon. Fear and hope wrestled on their faces, neither willing to blink first. The van climbed into broken clouds. Snow flicked at the windshield and vanished into heat. The Bobcat shifted, a tremor running through his shoulder blades. Jennifer murmured nonsense comforts, old barn talk, the way you soothe a foal. Easy now, you're safe. The road is kind. The dark can't have you tonight. At a fuel stop, she checked him with a flashlight. The pupils tightened, then softened. He licked once at dry lips and settled again. A trucker walked by and tipped his cap, curious, respectful. Jennifer smiled, closed the crate, and wrote the time on a wrinkled notepad, a quiet ledger of small wins. Back at the ranch, Tom rechecked permits, double doors, latch pins, backup latches. Linda placed fresh water, rabbit, and a fleece that smelled like sun. The dogs were inside, watching through glass. Baxter with calm golden eyes, Rosie trembling but refusing to look away, learning courage second-hand. Twilight bled into the plains as the van turned down the gravel lane. Porch light cut a triangle across the snow. Tom stepped out, coat open, hat shoved back, like a man trying not to hurry. Linda waited at the threshold, one hand pressed to the small ache in her chest, counting breaths like prayers. They worked without hurry, heat lamp on, gate swung, crate lifted like a fragile box of breath. The barn swallowed their footsteps. Jennifer knelt, cracked the door, and let quiet speak first. A musk of wild fur rolled out, edged with antiseptic and road dust and worry, a scent older than fences. The bobcat did not bolt. He flowed low, belly close to straw, ears high and swiveling, a ghost mapping new air. Tom did not reach. Linda did not whisper his name. They watched him find the corner shadow, fold himself small, and pretend the world had disappeared again. The oldest trick of survival. Paperwork travelled where touch could not. Jennifer reviewed meds, diet, symptoms that linger. Tom took notes in tight block letters. Linda underlined feed times. They agreed on silence, on patience, on the rhythm of being present without asking anything back yet. The first language of trust. When night settled, the ranch exhaled. Wind moved the eaves, a soft breath over old timber. In the pen, the bobcat tracked their shadows, then the small moths that bumped the heat lamp for a flicker of seconds. Instinct lifted his head, curious against his fear, like a pilot flame under ash. Jennifer left before midnight. The van taillights shrank down the lane and went dark. Tom and Linda stood together, listening to the barn's hush. Somewhere inside that hush, a tired heart kept time. Tomorrow would bring new rules, but tonight, survival was enough, and enough could still be holy. Dawn crept over the Wyoming hills like a pale hand opening, brushing frost from the fields around the Brennan's ranch. In the barn, Rambo's breath rose faintly in the chill, tiny clouds dissolving in the yellow heat of a hanging lamp. Linda watched from the doorway, arms folded tight against the cold, unsure whether she was keeping it out or holding something in. Tom poured hot water into a tin bowl, the steam rising between them. He didn't eat again, he said quietly. On the straw, the bobcat lay coiled, ribs faintly visible under his mottled fur. His eyes were open but distant, fixed somewhere past the wood planks, beyond all this. "He's watching," Linda whispered. "Even if he looks like he's not." They worked in silence. Tom checked the thermometer. Linda set out fresh rabbit and water, retreating before she finished. Each movement was deliberate, soft, as if sound itself might fracture the fragile thing they were trying to save. Baxter's bark echoed once from the house, and Rambo's ear flicked the first hint of life in hours. For days, the rhythm stayed the same. Feed, wait, clean, wait again. They took turns sitting outside the enclosure, reading in low voices, doing paperwork, anything to fill the waiting. Sometimes Linda hummed under her breath. The barn began to smell less of straw and fear, more of wood smoke and tea. On the fifth evening, Tom found Linda asleep in the chair by the pen, a blanket around her shoulders. Rambo was watching her, really watching for the first time. His pupils were wide, his body tense but not retreating. Tom didn't move or speak. He simply sat beside her, heart stuttering like a boy's. The small miracle wasn't loud. Days blurred into a pattern of quiet endurance. Snow melted on the roof, dripping in tiny metallic notes. When the generator kicked on, Rambo no longer flinched. He ate a few bites each night, never with them present, but never waiting for them to leave completely. Progress was measured in crumbs and stillness. One afternoon, Linda's knitting needles clicked softly while Tom mended a fence outside. The sound filled the barn like a heartbeat. Rambo shifted closer to the mesh, his nose twitching at the smell of wool and human comfort. Linda didn't look up, pretending she hadn't noticed. She just kept knitting, her hum steady as breathing. That night, Tom set his chair beside hers, bringing his old guitar from the house. His fingers were stiff, out of practice, but the tune was simple, a lullaby his mother once sang. Rambo's eyes glinted in the low light, head tilted slightly. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. When the storm came, wind hammering the barn doors, Linda ran to check the lamps. Rambo was pacing, restless but alive. She spoke gently, words lost in the roar. "You're all right, sweetheart. You're safe." He stopped, frozen between fear and trust. The moment stretched, fragile as ice, and held. After the storm, the world outside turned to white silence. Tom shoveled paths while Linda warmed the barn. Rambo lay near the heat lamp, chest rising stronger now. When Tom brought water, he didn't hide. He simply blinked, slow and deliberate, the feline gesture of peace. Tom returned it, awkward but sincere. That evening, Linda opened the journal she kept for rescue notes and wrote, "He's beginning to remember himself." Tom leaned over her shoulder, reading the line, then glanced toward the pen. The bobcat was grooming his paw, slow and methodical, a creature no longer fading, but quietly returning. As night fell, the wind softened. The Brennans sat side by side outside the enclosure, wrapped in the same blanket. Inside, Rambo stretched, yawned, and turned once before curling into sleep. For the first time since his arrival, he didn't face the corner. He faced them, outside. The lamp hummed, and hope exhaled. On the 18th morning, light fell in soft bars across the barn. Linda settled into her chair by the pen, wool pooling in her lap, needles clicking a quiet metronome. Rambo watched from the shadowed corner, alert but undecided, the rhythm tugging at some older memory of safety. Tom came in dusted with frost and sat without speaking, an old guitar resting across his knees. The first notes were simple, thin as thread. Rambo's ears turned toward the sound, then relaxed. His breathing slowed, matching the loose, unhurried cadence of Tom's hand. They set fresh water and a small portion of rabbit just inside the mesh and stepped back 3 paces. For minutes, nothing moved. Then Rambo slid forward, belly low, and took a cautious bite. He didn't flee. He chewed, eyes flicking to Linda's hands and back to the dish, measuring risk against hunger. That afternoon, Linda eased a feather wand under the bottom rail, letting the plumes skitter and pause like a timid thing. Rambo froze, pupils widening. Instinct tipped the balance. He darted a paw, missed, then tried again. A swift, beautiful equation of muscle and attention coming back online. Later, he sat upright to groom, pulling damp fur through careful teeth. The rough places on his coat, once dull and matted, began to show a buried luster. Tom made a note. Weight up by ounces, posture stronger, curiosity present. The list looked small on paper and enormous in the room. When evening deepened, Linda hummed the lullaby again. The barn seemed to lean closer to listen. A sound rose from Rambo low, uncertain at first, then steady as a distant motor. Purring filled the space between them. Linda's eyes shined. Tom set the guitar aside and let the moment stand. Rambo crept to the mesh, nose working as he mapped her scent. Lanolin, tea, clean straw. Linda did not reach. She simply blinked, slow and deliberate, the feline sign for peace. After a heartbeat, he answered with his own slow blink. A tiny handshake passed through wire and air. A gust rattled the doors. The generator kicked in with a dull cough. Weeks ago he would have scattered. Now his shoulders tensed, then eased. He looked to Linda, then to Tom, and stayed where he was, trusting their stillness more than he feared the noise he could not name. The next day brought small, stacked miracles. He stretched full length, toes splayed, ribs less stark. He climbed the lowest platform, tested it with a careful bounce, then settled to survey his domain. A fence, a lamp, 2 steady humans, and a story inching away from its worst page. "Morning, Rambo," Tom said, the name gentle, habitual now. At the sound, the bobcat made a soft chirrup, the wild cousin of hello. Linda laughed under her breath, surprise and relief mixing like warm breath in cold air. The pen did not feel like a cage. It felt like a room being furnished. While Linda spot cleaned the far corner, Tom watched from the gate. Rambo approached the mesh and pressed his cheek lightly against it, then retreated a step, thinking it over. He returned, repeated the gesture, then sat, as if demonstrating. I can come and go from closeness and still be whole. Night fell without drama. In the quiet, the guitar leaned against a hay bale, wool folded on the chair arm, and 2 mugs cooled beside a ledger of tiny victories. Inside the pen, Rambo curled in the open, facing them, tail tip ticking, like a clock that had finally remembered the hour. By early spring, the air around the Brennan's barn carried the scent of thawing earth and hay. Snowmelt ran in small rivulets beneath the fence, the sound like quiet applause for the life returning inside. Rambo stood at the mesh, tail twitching with something that looked almost like confidence. His amber coat had regained its sheen, and his eyes burned brighter than the lamp that warmed his space. Each morning, Tom opened the side hatch and spoke softly. "Breakfast, buddy." The bobcat didn't flinch anymore. Instead, he padded over, waited a respectful distance as the bowl was placed, then began to eat as the man remained nearby. Trust had turned from miracle to routine, and both seemed startled by how normal it now felt. Linda began adding small challenges. A toy feather hung from a rope, a cardboard tunnel, a rabbit pelt to drag. Rambo accepted each test like a student rediscovering the joy of study. One afternoon, he crouched low and leapt, catching the feather mid-air, landing with feline grace. Linda laughed so loudly that he froze, ears flicking in mock offense. Every evening, Tom adjusted the barn records and charted progress in careful handwriting. Muscle tone returning, full appetite, alert and social. He paused, tapping the pencil against the margin. Social, he repeated with a smile. Few veterinarians could write that word beside a wildcat's name and mean it, but their joy was tempered by the phone call that came late one night. Jennifer from Wild Heart Sanctuary spoke with quiet kindness. "We've arranged a permanent enclosure for him," she said. "It's time, Tom. He's stable enough to travel." Across the kitchen, Linda's knitting needles stopped mid-loop, and the silence thickened like fog. When the call ended, Tom looked at his wife. "She's right," he said gently. "They've got the permits, the staff, everything we can't." Linda stared at the floor. "He's not theirs anymore," she whispered. "He's ours. Look how he watches for us. He chose." The words trembled, but held conviction like steel under silk. The next day, she lingered longer at the pen. Rambo approached, pressing his head softly against the mesh. It wasn't a plea. It was something deeper: recognition, understanding. Linda touched her fingertips to the wire, her voice breaking. "You'd follow us, wouldn't you? Not because you have to, but because you want to." That night, the couple sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of untouched coffee. Tom's notes lay open between them. "We could apply for a private exotic permit," he said. "Retrofit the sunroom, extend it into the yard, keep him close but safe." Linda's eyes widened, half hope, half fear. "You'd do that?" Tom chuckled softly. "I'd do anything that makes sense to your heart." Over the next week, plans unfurled. Tom measured walls, drew sketches, and called old colleagues for advice. Linda contacted the county inspector, learning the language of liability and fencing strength. The barn became a construction zone. Wood beams, wire panels, the scent of sawdust. Rambo watched it all, tail curling as if sensing the shift in fate. Jennifer visited again, clipboard in hand, eyes cautious but kind. "You're serious," she said, surveying the work. "He's bonded with us," Linda replied, "and will follow every rule you give." There was no argument in Jennifer's gaze, only quiet admiration. "All right," she said. "Let's make this legal." By the end of the month, the transformation was complete. A spacious indoor-outdoor enclosure connected to their home, with climbing posts, resting ledges, and warm patches of sunlight spilling through mesh walls. On the morning of his move, Rambo stepped from the crate into his new space without hesitation, sniffed the air, then leapt onto a low platform as if he'd lived there forever. From the doorway, Linda wiped at her eyes while Tom stood with his arm around her shoulders. Rambo turned once, golden eyes meeting theirs, before curling into the center of his sun-drenched platform. For the first time, no bars stood between them, only glass, light, and the unspoken truth that they had chosen each other for good. The summer that followed felt like the world had shifted on its axis. The Brennan's house, once quiet and spare, now hummed with life, construction dust still clinging to the corners, and laughter echoing down hallways. Through the glass of the new sunroom, Rambo stretched in the morning light, his fur gleaming gold, the image of something wild made whole again. Tom tightened the final bolt on the outer gate, brushing his hands together. "There," he said. "That's the last of it." The enclosure was more than a pen. It was a world, trees planted inside, rocks stacked for climbing, a small pond for drinking. Linda stood beside him, tears threatening but smiling anyway. "You built him a kingdom," she whispered. Inside, Rambo prowled the edge of his territory, nose pressed to the seams of glass, paws silent on tile. He tested everything: the hammock, the wooden ledges, the tunnel that led outside. Every muscle moved with curiosity, no longer fear. When he finally paused by the couch, he climbed up and circled twice before lying down. Tom stared, speechless. "Guess he's home," Linda said softly. Jennifer returned for inspection, clipboard in hand, expression cautious but warm. "This is exceptional work," she said. "He looks peaceful." Rambo regarded her from his perch, blinking slow as a cat greeting an old friend. "He's not just surviving," Linda replied. "He's living." Jennifer nodded, signing the papers with a small smile. "Then he's officially yours." The following days fell into a gentle rhythm. Tom handled the feedings, measured diets, and kept notes like a scientist. Linda handled the quiet moments, brushing leaves from his hammock, reading aloud near the enclosure, filling the air with stories instead of silence. In their care, Rambo's body filled out, but so did his spirit. One morning, they introduced the dogs. Baxter ambled forward first, tail wagging in a lazy half circle. Rambo sniffed from behind the mesh, head tilted. Baxter lay down, calm and unbothered. Two veterans recognizing the same softness. Rosie, however, barked and retreated, torn between curiosity and fear. Rambo simply blinked and looked away, refusing to make her smaller. Days turned into weeks, and a strange friendship began to bloom through glass and wire. Rosie crept closer each day, drawn by Rambo's stillness. He would sit quietly, grooming his paw while she watched, heart pounding in her chest. Linda caught them once, both asleep in parallel sunlight, a glass wall between them, but peace on both sides. The Brennans' evenings became a ritual. Tom in his recliner, Baxter at his feet, Linda with her knitting, and Rambo sprawled across the couch in the sunroom beyond. Sometimes he'd lift his head at the sound of their voices and chirp, the wild cousin of a meow. Linda always answered, "Yes, love, we hear you." There were lessons in every day. Tom learned that love for a wild thing meant boundaries, doors shut when needed, routines never skipped. Linda learned that compassion could stretch but never cage, and Rambo learned that humans could keep promises, that hands could mean warmth instead of pain. They were all students in a quiet classroom of trust. One evening, as dusk melted into the horizon, Tom left the inner door open by accident. Rambo stepped through the frame into the living room, paws soundless on hardwood. Rosie froze on her dog bed, trembling. Rambo passed her without pause, leapt onto the recliner, and curled atop Tom's lap as if it had always been meant to be. Nobody moved. The silence felt sacred. Minutes stretched like hours before Rosie rose and padded closer. She sniffed, uncertain, then settled on the rug below, eyes heavy with acceptance. Linda pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling tears. "I think," Tom whispered, "we've been adopted." Then, later that night, when the house was dark, Rambo stirred on the couch, tail flicking in dreams. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees, and the stars hung low over Wyoming. Inside, the Brennans slept, surrounded by the soft sounds of breathing 2 humans, 2 dogs, and one once doomed wild heart that had finally found its forever home. Morning sunlight poured through the wide windows of the Brennans' ranch house, painting soft gold over everything it touched. Inside the sunroom, Rambo stretched across his favorite perch, fur gleaming like brushed copper. His world was peaceful now, safe, quiet, full of the steady rhythm of human voices and the warm scent of home. Each day began the same way. Tom's deep morning partner, followed by the scrape of the food dish, then the low rumble of Rambo's greeting purr. The bond between man and cat had grown so natural that even the silence between them carried understanding. Rambo no longer flinched when the door opened. He waited, tail flicking in lazy acknowledgement. Linda's mornings belonged to the small things changing straw, wiping glass, and humming the same tune she'd sung in the barn. Sometimes Rambo would follow the sound, resting near her feet as she worked. He had become her shadow. His wildness softened but not lost. "He listens," she often whispered to Tom, like he knows the song is about him. Baxter moved slower these days, his steps deliberate, his eyes full of patient kindness. He often sat near the glass wall, tail sweeping the floor as Rambo lounged on the other side. The two shared a quiet companionship, no bark, no growl, just a steady, wordless acceptance. They were both old souls who understood time. Rosie, however, was still learning. She hovered near the doorway, torn between fascination and fear. The first few times Rambo padded close, she bolted, but he never chased. He simply sat, eyes half closed, waiting. Each day she lingered longer, her small tremors easing into curiosity. The gap between them began to shrink. One afternoon, Tom opened the side door a little wider, letting fresh air flow through both spaces. Baxter stretched out to nap. Rosie crept closer. Rambo sniffed the air, then slowly lowered himself to the floor, chin resting on his paws. It was the calmest invitation she'd ever seen. Rosie inched forward, nose twitching, until she was near enough to see her reflection in his eyes. From the kitchen, Linda froze mid-stir, not daring to speak. Tom watched, breath held. Then Rosie sat, no bark, no retreat, just stillness. The moment passed in silence, but carried the weight of something vast. A truce sealed, not by words, but by trust born of patience. "That's it," Linda whispered. "That's family." As summer deepened, the days settled into an easy rhythm. Rambo roamed between his outdoor run and the sunroom, sometimes watching rabbits beyond the fence, other times sleeping in shafts of light. Rosie grew bolder, padding alongside him on her side of the glass, her tail high now. Baxter, ever the peacemaker, seemed proud of them both. Visitors began to come, a neighbor, a friend, a curious vet. Everyone wanted to see the house Bobcat. Rambo accepted the attention on his terms. He would emerge, study the newcomers, then return to his couch, as if granting temporary access to his kingdom. Tom joked that they should hang a sign, asterisk, enter at your own or, asterisk. Evenings were their favorite time. Tom in his recliner, Rambo sprawled across his lap, Baxter at his feet, Rosie curled nearby, finally relaxed. Linda would knit by the window, the room alive with the small sounds of comfort, purring, breathing, the quiet crackle of the fire. The once lonely house had found its heartbeat again. One night, after a long day of chores, Tom dozed off mid-show. Rambo remained on his lap, eyes half open, watching the flicker of the television. When Linda switched off the lights, she glanced back and smiled. In the dim glow, cat and man slept as one silhouette, proof that the wild and the human could share peace without taming either. Outside, the Wyoming sky spread endless and deep. Stars scattered over the fields like seeds of light, and the wind moved through the grass with the gentlest touch. Inside, the Brennans slept surrounded by warmth and fur and trust. The wild heart that once waited for death now beat in harmony with every life it had chosen to love. The first snow of winter arrived silently, floating down over the Brennan ranch like a secret. Rambo pressed his nose to the glass of the sunroom, eyes wide at the flakes drifting past. He had seen snow before, but this was the first time it belonged to him. Not a storm of fear and cold, but one of wonder. Tom stood behind him, coffee mug in hand. "Looks like you've got yourself a show," he murmured. Rambo flicked his tail, watching the flakes stick and vanish against the pane. When Tom slid the door open to the outer enclosure, cold air swept in, crisp and bright. Rambo hesitated, then stepped forward into his first Wyoming winter as a free soul. Outside, the snow came up past his paws. He lifted one, then another, the strange texture confusing but delightful. Within seconds, he was leaping, rolling, and pouncing, his amber fur powdered white. Linda stood on the porch, laughing softly as he tried to catch the falling flakes in his mouth. "He's playing," she whispered. "He's finally playing." Baxter waddled into the enclosure's inner corridor, tail wagging slowly. Rosie followed, tentative but brave. The dogs watched Rambo's joyful chaos with confusion, then excitement. Baxter barked once a low, happy sound, and Rambo froze, ears perked. Then, astonishingly, he bounded toward the fence, mirroring the old dog's energy. Rosie couldn't resist. She darted along the outer path, chasing his shadow through the mesh. Their dance left tracks looping and crossing like stitched threads across the snow. Linda filmed through tears, unable to speak. Tom placed a gloved hand on her shoulder, smiling quietly. "From death row to this," he said. "We did all right." Evenings grew longer, darker, but the warmth inside never dimmed. Rambo would nap near the fire while Tom read aloud, his deep voice a constant hum in the background. Rosie lay nearby, eyes half closed, while Baxter's slow breathing filled the spaces between sentences. It was a kind of peace too simple for words, but heavy with meaning. Some nights, Rambo sat by the window, staring into the whitened pasture beyond the fence. His eyes glowed faint gold in the reflection. Perhaps he remembered the wild, still waiting out there. The mountains, the cold trails, the silence. Yet every time the wind howled, he turned back toward the sound of human voices, choosing warmth over distance. Christmas came quiet and bright. The Brennans didn't hang many decorations. Instead, they filled the house with smells of cinnamon and pine. Linda tied a red ribbon loosely around Rambo's collar, though he'd only tolerate it for a few minutes. "Handsome devil," Tom teased. Rambo blinked, unimpressed, but stayed long enough for a family photo. Jennifer sent a card from Wild Heart Sanctuary, writing, "He was never meant to stay with us. He was meant to find you." Linda placed it on the mantel, beside a photo of Rambo stretched across Tom's lap, Baxter and Rosie asleep nearby. The image felt unreal, a family formed by accident, held together by grace. As the snow deepened outside, Tom built a small shelter within the enclosure, a place for Rambo to retreat when he wanted solitude. The Bobcat used it sparingly, preferring to stay close to the warmth of the house. Sometimes Linda would find him sitting by the glass at midnight, watching her reflection as if reminding her he was still there. One evening, she opened the inner door to check on him. Rambo brushed past her leg, tail high, and jumped onto the couch. The move was casual, almost routine now. Tom chuckled, sliding over to make space. The three of them sat in a row, the room glowing with firelight, the storm raging gently outside. Later, as the night deepened, Rambo stretched across Tom's lap, his purr a soft rumble against the backdrop of wind. Linda rested her head on Tom's shoulder, eyes closing. The world beyond the window was frozen and vast, but inside the little house, every breath was warm, every sound alive. Winter had come, but so had peace. 2 years passed quietly on the Wyoming plains. The Brennan's ranch, once just a patch of land and an old barn, had become a living testament to what compassion could build. Inside the sunroom, Rambo sprawled in his favorite spot by the window, heavier now, stronger, and utterly at ease. The wild fire in his eyes had not gone out. It had simply learned peace. Tom's hair had gone whiter, but his laugh was the same. He'd rise early to brew coffee and tap on the glass, calling, "Mornin', champ." Rambo would stretch, yawn wide, and press his nose against the pane, leaving a faint print like a signature. Their mornings belonged to routine, to warmth, to the rhythm of beings who had saved each other in quiet ways. Linda still hummed while she worked, though she took longer to get from room to room. Rambo followed her sometimes, padding along the edge of the glass, watching her reflection move. When she paused to catch her breath, he mirrored her stillness, golden eyes half closed in calm understanding. He seemed to know her pace, her heart, even her silences. One grey morning, a familiar vehicle pulled into the drive. Dr. Margaret Willis stepped out, her breath visible in the cold. She hadn't seen Rambo since the day he left Pine Ridge. Tom and Linda met her on the porch, the reunion warm and hesitant. "You won't believe him," Linda said softly. He's not the same creature you remember. Margaret smiled, following them to the sunroom. When she saw him, she stopped short. The emaciated, broken bobcat she'd once signed off for euthanasia now sat, alert and regal, fur shining, muscles taut beneath the winter light. I wouldn't have believed it, she whispered. He looks alive, Tom finished. Completely alive. Rambo approached the glass, cautious but curious. Margaret crouched, meeting him at eye level. For a long breath, they regarded each other, the woman who had once given up hope and the animal who had refused to die. Then, as if sensing her emotion, he pressed a paw gently to the glass. Margaret's eyes blurred. You found him, she said. You gave him back to himself. They walked through the house, Margaret noting the modifications, the enclosures, the safety systems, the warmth in every detail. You've done something extraordinary here, she told them. Linda shook her head. He did it. We just gave him a place to start over. Through the window, Rambo watched them, tail flicking with easy contentment. Later, they gathered in the living room with coffee and laughter that rose like a melody. Baxter lay curled near the hearth, his muzzle almost white now, while Rosie dozed beside him, one paw twitching in sleep. The harmony of it all, the dogs, the bobcat, the humans, felt like a secret the world had forgotten, that peace could exist in any shape. When Margaret left, she stood for a long moment beside her car, staring back at the glowing house. Through the window, Rambo lifted his head as if to acknowledge her. Goodbye, boy, she whispered. You were never just a case number. Then she drove off, her taillights vanishing into the pale morning fog. In the weeks that followed, Rambo seemed to grow gentler, almost contemplative. He spent long afternoons watching snow fall across the pasture. Sometimes Rosie joined him at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. The distance between them had vanished long ago. Now they existed as one quiet family, bound by shared safety. Tom and Linda aged into the stillness of winter. The house slowed around them, each sound softer, each day heavier with meaning. But no matter how tired they became, the rhythm never broke. Every night, Rambo climbed onto the couch, curled across Tom's lap, and purred like a steady heartbeat, reminding them that love, once chosen, does not fade. On the last evening of the year, the snow fell thick and slow. The fire burned low, Rosie and Baxter asleep, Linda's knitting resting unfinished on her lap. Rambo raised his head, watching the world outside disappear into white. Then he settled again, his purr blending with the whisper of wind. The house was quiet, but full. The wild heart was home. Winter returned once more, quiet and deep, wrapping the Brennan Ranch in a familiar hush. The trees along the fence bent under the weight of snow, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside the sunroom, Rambo rested near the glass, watching flakes drift past. His fur had silvered slightly at the muzzle, but his golden eyes were steady, calm, and knowing. Tom moved slower now, his steps careful but determined. Each morning, he shuffled to the window with a steaming mug, greeting the cat who had long ago become his shadow. "Morning, old man," he said with a smile. Rambo responded with a soft chirrup, pressing his head to the glass. The simple ritual had outlived seasons, yet it never lost its quiet magic. Linda, her hair more white than chestnut now, still hummed when she worked. Her hands had grown thin, but her touch remained gentle. Rambo followed her movement through the house like he always had, watching her reflection as she tidied, read, or dozed in her chair. He understood her slower rhythm, matching it with patience only the wild could perfect. Rosie had bloomed into confidence, her black and white coat sleek, her steps purposeful. Baxter, older and greyer, spent most days sleeping by the hearth. The four of them, 2 humans, 2 dogs, 1 bobcat, moved through the house like a single living thing. The years had softened every edge, blending fear into tenderness, silence into peace. On a clear afternoon, the road outside filled with the crunch of tires. A familiar voice called from the gate Jennifer Morrison, older but as bright-eyed as ever. "You still keeping that miracle alive?" She laughed. Linda welcomed her in, warmth spilling through the open door. "He's not just alive," she said softly. "He's part of the family." Jennifer entered the sunroom and froze. Rambo stood proudly in the light, fur thick and shining, tail curling lazily. "Well, look at you," she murmured. He approached her without hesitation, sniffed her hand, and rubbed against it. Jennifer's voice cracked. "He remembers," Tom smiled. "Some things you don't forget when they save you." That evening, the 3 humans shared dinner around the small wooden table, the air filled with laughter and stories. Rambo perched on the couch near the fire, his gaze calm and steady, as if he understood every word. When Jennifer prepared to leave, she knelt to meet him one last time. "You found your forever," she whispered. He blinked slowly, a promise returned. As weeks passed, the ranch grew quieter. Winter lights softened the days, and nights stretched long by the fire. Rambo's steps became slower, his naps longer. Sometimes he sat by the window for hours, watching the hills fade into snow, his reflection aging alongside the world outside. Tom never disturbed him. He just sat nearby, reading softly. One afternoon, Linda fell asleep on the couch, knitting half-finished in her lap. Rambo climbed up beside her, curling close, his purr a steady lull beneath the ticking clock. When Tom found them later, both were still woman and cat, wrapped in the golden calm of late light. He stood there for a long time, not wanting to break the moment. Spring arrived on the breath of rain. The grass grew again around the enclosure, and birds returned to sing through open windows. Tom walked the property one morning and stopped by Rambo's favourite spot under the oak. The wildflowers had already claimed the earth. "He never really left," Linda said behind him. "He just went home another way." That evening, as the sun set in ribbons of gold and violet, Tom sat in his chair with Rose's head resting on his knee. The fire crackled softly, echoing a heartbeat that once purred through the room. He looked toward the window where Rambo used to sleep and whispered, "Thank you, friend." Outside, a faint breeze stirred the leaves, gentle as breath. When night settled, the stars came out one by one, scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Love lingered in every corner, the hum of memory, the warmth of belonging. Somewhere in the dark, the wind carried a sound that might have been a purr, deep and endless. The wild heart was finally home, forever. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.